Morning, everybody. You could find your seats. We're going to get kicked off here. My name is Darren Wastchak. I am the current board chair for the Arizona Town Hall, and I'm so excited to see so many people here in person. And then we've got a whole lot of people that are online joining us by Zoom. So let's not forget that we've got a whole nother crowd of people that are doubling our size, basically, that are participating in this Housing Arizona background report launch. And this is an exciting part of what we do as Arizona Town Hall. This topic was picked 2 years ago. We've spent a lot of time getting ready for today and the launch of this year's topic on housing. And that started with a research committee last summer coming together in order to develop what we're going to be launching today, which is our report on Housing Arizona. So I'm very much looking forward to our discussion today. I want to start off by thanking our sponsors for today and many of the things that we're going to be doing across this year, working with the topic of housing. The Morrison Institute, Maricopa Community Colleges, and Rio Salado. Isn't this a wonderful facility that they share with us? So thank you, Rio Salado. Yes. Absolutely. I'm going to be introducing Deanna shortly to help us out in our presentation today, and she's always a very big driver in helping us to have this facility. So thank you, Deanna. And then SRP, APS, Molina, Salt River Community, as well as Habitat for Humanity. So thank you very much for our sponsors for today's event. Let me see here. Who's doing our slides here? Tara. Okay, great. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about the Arizona Town Hall. And so we've been around since 1962. The organization has a robust history with a mission of basically educating, engaging, connecting, and empowering people to solve critical issues that are important to the state of Arizona. So that's our mission. That's what we're all about. Had a conversation with Brad, one of our panelists, just a few minutes ago, talking about an experience that he'll share a little bit with us as he becomes a member of our panel, talking about how that mission brought people together in Prescott, Arizona last year, talking about the important topic of housing. And it was bringing people from lots of different, I guess you could say, factions or beliefs or opinions about the idea of housing. And what it did and the town hall process did is it brought them together in order to have a constructive civil conversation about that topic. And that's what town hall has been doing since 1962. And it's important that all the perspectives have equal weight. And that, again, is an example of what we do day in and day out. And then the last bullet point you see on there is the idea of emphasis on informed consensus. And that's where our background report comes in. We want, as we address a topic and come together to discuss a topic, we want everybody that's in the room to have some background information so that they come to the table already understanding the issue, some of the details around that issue, and that's where our background report comes in. Now, one of the other things I wanted to point out is that from today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing community town halls. And the community town halls are something that we've been doing for probably about maybe 5 or 6 years, where the town hall process originally was 2 town halls a year, where we would gather at the Grand Canyon or we would gather at in Prescott. And by the way, I always love to ask this question. How many of you guys ever attended, let's start with just a town hall event at all? Raise your hand if you've been. Wow, got the choir in the room. That's fantastic. Let me ask, how many of you attended one of the 3-day town hall events that we did at the Grand Canyon or in Prescott? Raise your hand. Okay, not too bad. By the way, everybody that's got their hand raised, you might ask them at a break or whatnot what that experience was like, because it was about 150 people sequestered for 3 days to focus on the topic of the day. What we did about 5 or 6 years ago is we expanded that to community town halls, where we go out into the communities, from Bisbee, up to Flagstaff, Yuma, the White Mountains, and we go into the community and we do our community town hall efforts. And instead of having 150 people gathered together, we've expanded that to well over 2,000 people a year, where they are asking about what their unique concerns are for the topic of the day. So that's community town halls. But future leader town halls, as you might imagine, is bringing young people into our process, introducing them to the process, and introducing them to the idea that we can have a civil dialogue where we listen to all sides of an issue, come to a consensus around that issue for the benefit of the state of Arizona. And so that is, those are the two important things that we do, in addition to international efforts. An international committee that has conversation and dialogue around the topics that are important, not only with our friends in Mexico, but also now we've added in Canada. So we also have international stuff going on as well. Okay, so enough of the background there. What I want to do now is I want to introduce our president, Tara Jackson, to introduce and give a little bit of background on our report, the housing report, and how we got to where we are. Thank you very much, Tara.
He's just a little taller than me. Thank you so much, Daran, and thank you to all of you who are here in person and online. What a wonderful group of community leaders from across the state looking at a really critical issue. You know, Daran mentioned in his opening that educating is one of the most essential elements of our mission and what we do. Educating all Arizonans about the needs and concerns of different communities through our programs, our community town halls. But critical to that education is the background report. Now we have one in the middle of each table. You also have the QR codes there. And so you might want to pick that up and look at it. If you love this report and you want to take it with you, I just want to remind you, we're a nonprofit. We'd love your donation so we can print some more. And we'd love you to utilize it. It's on our website. You can download the QR code. But let me talk about what goes into that. So the writers and the editors of the report have an almost impossible task: to create a foundational document that is relevant not only to the policy experts, many of whom are in this room or online, but that's also accessible to communities around the state, accessible and usable by, for example, a small business owner in Kingman or Douglas. They also need to include all the relevant information, but they can't make it too long. That laughter is from a longtime research committee member. Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. You know how hard this is. And then they have to take an issue that a lot of people view as partisan or maybe divisive, and they have to cover it in a nonpartisan way. And they have to do this also while ensuring that there are examples of how to solve the issue, because that's what our goal is. How do we solve this issue for different communities? Once they have done this almost impossible task, then they have to run the draft by the research committee. The research committee is comprised of a diverse group of people from around the state. They have very different positions and thoughts on an issue, and they're not afraid to tell you their opinion. The research committee, I want to give a shout out, first of all, because they do an amazing job. The chair of our research committee is online, retired Judge Pat Norris. Arlen Colton is the vice chair from Tucson. We have some folks from the research committee here in the room and online. If you're here online, raise your actual virtual hand and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all. Yeah. So, in addition to all those things that I just said, you have to make it look nice. And I want to give a shout out to the marketing department at the Maricopa Community College District, who made a beautiful, beautiful report, because that's what makes people pick it up and see what's inside. But now back to the content of that report itself. So I mentioned the research committee. When you put this draft in front of the research committee, everyone's going to tell you what you need to add and take out. And by the way, they conflict with each other, right? And who's ever editing and writing the report has to massage all that, work through it, and create this, this impossible task, this report. So, what I want to do in a brief entry to the editor and who also wrote most of this report is, instead of my words about this report, I want to read to you an email I received. If you're a longtime town hall member, you probably know Mary Greer, one of the most brilliant, insightful people who's ever worked with the town hall. She now lives in the state of Washington, but she reads our emails and she reads the reports, and she does not give praise lightly. She said, "This is just a quick note to let you know how impressed I am with the Morrison Institute's most recent report. It was easily digestible, well organized, and full of great information, especially the innovative approaches being implemented in Arizona and elsewhere. The Engaged Citizen Toolkit is brilliant and a wonderful addition that should be included in future reports, of course, modified as needed." So, thank you to Mary Greer, who didn't know I was going to share her words, but just to give you an insight as to why you should pick up this report, the accompanying report, utilize it, share it, do whatever you can with it. And now to give you an overview of what's in the report. And from you, if you could give a big shout out of applause and gratitude to Ashley Cooper, research analyst with the Morrison Institute for Public Policy. Ashley.
Button to switch. Center button to switch. Oh, we're already here. To the right. Oh, gotcha. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. As Tara said, my name is Ashley Cooper. I am a research analyst with the Morrison Institute for Public Policy and with Arches. There we go. All right, so Morrison Institute has proudly partnered with Arizona Town Hall for years, and this year we were thrilled to get the opportunity to work with this particular research committee on this special topic. A little bit of background on us. So for over 40 years, the Morrison Institute has served as Arizona's premier public policy research organization. I'm proud to be a part of it. We conduct rigorous data-driven research on multiple public policy topics affecting Arizona, from housing to public safety to education to child welfare. I'm going to be brief and just give a little bit of background and then get to the report so that we can leave some room for the panelists. So the Arizona Research Center for Housing and Economic Solutions, or ARCHES, was funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in 2023. ARCHES is co-located at the Morrison Institute and U of A's Drockman Institute in partnership with NAU and the University of New Mexico. The goal of the center is to advance knowledge and evidence-based solutions related to housing challenges across Arizona and the Southwest, with a lens toward Hispanic and underserved communities. The acronym was chosen because we felt that it really illustrated the goals of the center to create arches or connections between research and practice, academia and communities, and between research institutions. As part of this seed funding from HUD, Arches is committed to 22 different research projects on housing currently that conduct place-based research within 3 pillars of access, health, and climate. We have over 20 researchers across our partner universities who are collaborating on these projects. Each year, we highlight several projects in our State of Housing report, which you'll see on your tables, and we expect more publications to be forthcoming, so keep an eye out. All right, you should have a copy of this report as well as a QR code, but if you need a bigger one, there's one here. So ARCH's second annual State of Housing in Arizona report served as our baseline to provide context for this year's Town Hall background report. You can download a copy of the statewide report online. We also have county reports for each of Arizona's 15 counties and an interactive dashboard to compare county data. This annual report is intended to highlight the current state of housing in Arizona by examining trends using the most recent data available, including population demographics, housing stock, home ownership, rental housing, and homelessness. This year, we also highlighted changes from pre and post COVID-19 pandemic based on available data. The report compares Arizona to 5 additional Sunbelt states: California, Florida, Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas. It also highlights current state and local policy efforts to address housing issues. I encourage you all to read the full report and keep an eye out for our 2026 State of Housing Report, which will be published in August. All right, so this year's town hall topic is of clear significance to those of us at Arches and to our state as a whole. As we discuss in this report, access to affordable housing, or housing that costs 30% or less of household income, is essential for individuals and communities to thrive. In Arizona, housing affordability continues to be an urgent concern, as home prices and rents have significantly outpaced wage growth. This widening affordability gap has left Arizonans without attainable housing. While Arizona's housing stock is increasing, it is not doing so fast enough, or most importantly, at the affordability levels that are desperately needed. The most dire consequence of this housing crisis is that Arizona is seeing record numbers of families, unaccompanied youth, and seniors experiencing homelessness, with many more experiencing increased housing insecurity and even foregoing essentials like medical care and utilities to afford housing. Research shows that safe, affordable housing is critical for community health, educational outcomes, and economic sustainability. Numerous studies have also shown that common beliefs opposing the development of affordable housing are in fact untrue, such as the myths that affordable housing brings down property values or brings increased crime. It does neither. Finally, this report highlights several examples from Arizona cities and towns that demonstrate the ways that innovative housing solutions can meet our community needs through public, private, and volunteer investment. It also includes the Activated Citizen Toolkit, or our resource guide, to learn about how to get involved in local housing policy through civic actions and groups. In sum, we hope that this background report and the State of Housing and Reports can serve as useful tools to lead to engaged action to follow these community discussions. So that was quick. I look forward to hearing from our panelists today, who will do a deeper dive into some of these topics. Please feel free to contact me if you want to connect about our work or if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and all of the work from Morrison Institute. It obviously, with the Arches work that you guys were doing, it was a perfect marriage of the research you had already been doing with our topic. So thank you for lending all of your efforts, and everybody else at Morrison that did their work. So now what we're going to do is have a little bit of discussion in a panel about this topic. And we've brought some excellent people together to do that. But to lead that discussion is going to be Deanna Villanueva-Saucedo. And Deanna, there you are. Okay, you were in the back and you're moving around on me here. Okay, so Deanna is going to lead this discussion and make our introduction. So thank you, Deanna.
So good morning, everyone. Are you ready for this lively discussion? Oh, that was lukewarm. This is gonna get a little spicier, so brace yourselves. If I could have our panelists come on down, Price is Right style. Can we have Brad and Gabriel and Eric and Joan? Everyone involved in housing says that over and over again, right? Am I right? Thanks, Joan, for leading that charge. So first of all, on behalf of Maricopa Community Colleges, welcome to our spaces. Maricopa Community Colleges, like community colleges across the country, have civic engagement core to their mission. Not only do we prepare students to go on to fabulous jobs so they can be self-sufficient in their communities or to transfer to a university, but we are also committed to making sure that our students are active, engaged citizens ready to engage in civic life. And that is front and center to our mission, which is why we are so pleased to always partner with Arizona Town Hall and support their efforts. So as we move into the panel, I'm going to start here with Brad and move on down. If you could introduce yourself to the crowd, your organization's connection to the topic, and one misconception. If you could knock on every door across Arizona to correct something that you keep hearing that you know is just nuts, what would that be? Give you a second to think about that. biggest misconception? I know there's plenty out there. Brad, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, thank you very much. Brad Fain, President and CEO of Fain Signature Group. We're up in Prescott Valley, Arizona, primarily working in rural markets. We have projects in Prescott Valley. We've looked at projects in Prescott, and we have projects in Cottonwood. So we're more of a rural market developer, a community builder. And we're connected to this topic because we're in the community building space. So we do touch industrial and commercial and retail and all of that. But what's essential to all of that is housing. Housing, we look at it as three pillars of a stool that make it work. You have to have jobs, and jobs kind of start it. But if you don't have housing, then the workers can't live there. And once you have, good jobs and good housing, then you get the fun stuff that everybody wants, which is the Sprouts or the AJ's or the fun restaurant you get to go to. And that's the commercial and the retail and the shopping. And the economy kind of moves in those three elements, and that's how we're connected to it. So we move in and out of that. But housing is really our concern right now, because as a nation, as a state, as a county, and as a town, we're short on housing, and we're short on affordable housing that our workers can live in, and people can live a great life and live in the community they work in and play in and shop in. And so that's how we're connected to it. We've had several housing projects. We've had several multifamily projects. And then we were a part of a town hall that Tara helped us work on up in the Prescott Valley area just at the end of last year. And we had an amazing turnout. And what I would say about that, the misconception would be, we all recognize there's a problem. I sit in many rooms where activists yell at me. They call me names. They tell me I'm killing people. I'm harming the environment. I'm harming the community. But when we had that town hall, I saw those same activists sitting in the room because they know there's a problem. They know there's an issue, and they want to be a part of solving it. And I think the misconception is we're really not that far off on what we want and how to get there. We just have slight differences. And if we can get in a room and work through them, we probably will find our differences aren't that great, and there's great compromise in the middle, because we all want the same thing. And that town hall showed me that everybody knows there's a problem because they were all there.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate that.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? So my name is Joan Serviss. I am the Affordable Housing and Homelessness Director at the Arizona Community Foundation. And I've been on the job about 4 months now. But ultimately, the connection between ACF and housing is that the Arizona Community Foundation embarked on a strategic plan, a community convening about 2-3 years ago, and really prioritized and winnowed down their focus opportunities. And those 3 focus opportunities are education, environment, and housing. And so my role at ACF is to really, bring new life into their housing strategy. And really address the full housing continuum from our unsheltered population to keeping people stably housed in their home or apartment. And I would, in terms of that housing continuum, I would say that one of the common misconceptions is that our unhoused population is there by choice, that they are unhoused by choice. And oftentimes it's policy, inappropriate policy, lack of funding that has contributed to their crisis. Plus, it could be a medical crisis or, an employment situation. It's not often their choice that they are unhoused or housing unstable. So I would like to dispel that myth.
Thank you, Joan. Eric.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Wolverton. I'm the CEO for Habitat for Humanity of Northern Arizona. Main reason that I'm sitting at this table is 5 years ago, the city of Flagstaff City Council and Mayor declared a housing emergency. Big surprise, right, guys? But we saw that as a call to action. We were building just 1 or 2 homes a year, and we knew that we needed to do more in order to impact our community. And so we really looked at ourselves internally first and foremost, and asked ourselves, Habitat's been around for 50 years. They've done great work. How can we make our program even better than 50 years ago when it was first invented? And so we came up with the concept of our starter home program, which allows us to build standalone homes for families, but rather than the forever home, they are in home ownership for 10 years. That sounds like a very, very weird concept. But the idea behind starter homes is leveraging Habitat's financing of 0% interest loans to create an exacerbated equity savings platform. So that way we're moving families 80% or below AMI out of that poverty level and then being able to graduate from their starter home with wealth and closer to the middle class. And then enabling them to be able to have a down payment for a conventional home or loan, or start a small business, or do whatever they like, because this is a non-taxable solution. This is their earned wealth staying in their pockets rather than going to a landlord. So we're really excited that because of this concept, we went from those 1 to 2 homes a year to now, at the end of this year, we are hopefully going to be finishing our 42nd starter home in just 3 years. This is a big movement for us in Flagstaff, but now we're very excited that we're already planning future developments in our neighboring rural communities of Payson, Winslow, and Fredonia at the Utah border. This really gives us an opportunity to really look at housing and identify the best ways that we can graduate folks out of that housing continuum. As Joan was mentioning, we have to incrementally move people through that continuum, but most importantly, we need to graduate them out with wealth. And what I'm also most excited about with this program are our homes are permanent affordable housing. So once that home is sold, it is then going to be refurbished and resold to another low income family. So that way, now our units are serving multiple generations and forever. This isn't just a platform for us to enjoy and to benefit from, but for future generations too. The misconception that I would make mention is what our faces of our workforce look like. And so I challenge you to think about this little antidote that I kind of throw out there all the time. So we do a lot of business meetings, and in doing so, we go out to lunch a lot. And when we do that, we decide, okay, we're going to put in our order, and that order goes to the back house, to the kitchen. Most likely, we're never going to see that person who's making our food for us. We are giving them 100% blind trust to make us a good meal. And then beyond that, once the meal is served, we ingest that food into our body. Why can't we trust these people to be our neighbors? And that's what I find to be the big misconception.
Thank you, Eric. Gabriel.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gabriel Jaramillo. I'm the Director of Healthy Communities with the Vitalyst Health Foundation. Our connection to housing is through the social determinants of health, and understanding that health is more than just access to a doctor or those regular visits. It's really that built environment and understanding the impacts that the community that you're in, the neighborhood that you live in, has a direct impact to your health. And housing is health. That is a direct connection that we make at Vitalyst, and we work on that systems level wide, from our state partnerships down to our local communities, and really try to address those needs in a variety of different ways, from policy, legislation, zoning, access to housing, financing, funding, in a variety of capacities. I think for me, the biggest misconception, and I don't know if it's a misconception, but it's something that you hear not only at the local community, but at the state legislature and even at the federal levels, is this is not the answer. There's no silver bullet. There's no singular answer to housing, and that's what makes this topic so complex along the entire spectrum of housing. When we talk about homelessness solutions, all the way to affordable home ownership and wealth development for individuals to get them to sustainability, there's no silver bullet to this, and that's what we're really trying to address. Is how do we address a variety of aspects that span so many different aspects of housing and how they interact with policy and funding in so many different levels. So that's the complexity of housing and why we're all here.
Thank you for that. If we could stay with you, Gabe, for just a minute. The role of housing in creating vibrant, thriving communities. So you've already touched upon this, how really housing is part of that larger, healthy ecosystem. Can you expand on that a little bit more? And then I'd love to hear some of our other panelists' thoughts about this.
Yeah, some of the basic, or I guess some of the first things that we hear about unsafe housing conditions of the impact to health. And I think that's more prevalent in some of the cases of asthma-related cases, of living in subpar housing conditions. So we've seen those impacts, whether it be from zoning restrictions that limit communities to live around industrial areas, the impact that has on their health directly to their breathing, to their well-being, to access to food, access to healthcare, access to the services that they provide due to zoning. We talk about that type of housing and where it's built from previous zoning measures and practices like that. But it also expands to what Brad was discussing as far as the need for housing when you're attracting businesses, when you want those thriving communities. You not only have to have the economic impact, but you need to have the housing for those individuals that are working there. And that's something that we see, and understanding that workforce has the right to live in the same communities that they work in, to help build that healthy community. We all want to live in the same neighborhoods that our teachers live in, that our principals, that our police officers, that our firefighters live in. So it is that aspect of housing that creates that healthy community. It is also the community design, whether we have safe transportation for individuals that maybe don't own a car or want to use various modes of transportation, making sure that it is safe for them to utilize those as needed and as possible. So really it encompasses that community design that has a place for everybody in the community to have everybody feel safe, and has a place for them, whether it's a rental or ownership, and everything in between.
Appreciate that, Gabriel. Brad, since you were called out in those comments, thoughts about how housing from where you sit, your location in Arizona and your work, is really part of that overall community health?
Well, I think he said it very well. I mean, housing is essential to the health of the community. Whether you're retired or whether you're starting out in your first home, your first job right out of college, or somewhere in between, housing is in that story of your life with you all the way through. We have a starter house, you get your equity, as we talked about, building equity, and then you might start a family and you need to move to a home that is suitable for a family. That's your desire anyways, to maybe have a yard, connected to good schools that you want to be a part of. And then maybe when your kids leave, you downsize because you're tired of taking care of the big house. And so you want to live in a house that allows you to live that chapter of your life. But housing is in our story from the start till the end. And it's part of the health of a community. And if we look at communities, we've all traveled through them, if we haven't lived in them, where the workers live somewhere else. And what does it do? It creates horrible commutes. People are, you hear about Southern California and they're just trapped on the freeways for hours and hours and hours. And that's because the workers have to travel from where they live to where they work. And you hear about small communities like Telluride. Workers don't live in Telluride. Retirees do, and people's vacationing and and they're disconnected. And so I think if you want a healthy community, as you were speaking to, you got to put them together. I mean, who doesn't want a teacher living down the street? If you're raising a family and like, hey, well, let's go ask, maybe we can get some help with our son or daughter's education. And who doesn't want a fireman living near them, or a police officer? So this notion of dispersing our different workforces away from the community that they serve doesn't seem to be a healthy model. And I think we need to think about America and getting us back to being healthy, which is us living together, working together, playing together, dining together, and trusting each other.
Thank you, Brad. Joan, you look like you were ready to jump in on this one.
Agree with Gabe and Brad's points. And I just want to highlight, when we talk about the role of housing in a vibrant community, I think the housing report did a great job of really highlighting housing and community resiliency. And, you think about the people in that community and how they're supported from cradle to grave. When you think about, housing is so important for educational attainment. It's so important for, and it's definitely highlighted in this report. It's important for workforce development, and it's important for our seniors. As the report highlights, our seniors are our fastest growing unhoused population. And even those, we also have to think about the seniors, and I think it was actually the Arch's background report that highlights our housed seniors that are living in dilapidated units that don't have that need those fixes, those weatherization fixes. So there's vibrancy, or housing creates that vibrancy. It creates that opportunity. But I also wanted to highlight something that I found that is not often talked about in terms of housing, and that's the civic health. We often talk about civic health. It's really like topical right now, but we don't talk about that in its intersection with housing, and we should, because when you're housed, whether you're housed in a home or a rental home, you still oftentimes have pride in your community. You want to know what's going on in your community. There's, just think about Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? You have that shelter resolved, but you then want to give back to the community. When I was at the Housing Coalition, we put together a voter guide for our unhoused population, that even though you don't have a house, you still can vote. I was such a kind of advocate. I wasn't an activist, but an advocate for making your voice heard in the policy decisions that impact your life. We put together that guide, and then we also really highlighted that voter registration forms should be included in your Section 8 voucher briefing process, right? I even planted a seed. I didn't water it, but I planted a seed that our affordable housing development communities and our shelters should be voting places where you go to vote, because then people engage and see things in a different way. And I bring all this kind of back to the point that, when we talk about community vibrancy and resiliency and a healthy community, we also need to think about that volunteerism, that civic pride, and recognize that housing is built in the polling places just as it's built with bricks and cement and mortar.
Well, the civic engagement advocate in me just loves that add to the conversation, Joan. So thank you. Eric, you already started us off with some of the ideas around creative solutions. And to Gabe's point, we would not be here year after year talking about housing crisis if it weren't so complicated to solve. And I know many of the familiar faces in the room know this and live this day in and day out. There is no silver bullet. So as we talk about creative strategies, we'll start with Eric, but I'd love to hear from all of our panelists around this. And it can be anything from those public-private partnerships, employer housing, zoning solutions, underutilized open space, like the list goes on and on. So what are some of those creative solutions that might be brought to bear as we think about things in a new way in order to solve the crisis that we now see? Eric, you want to kick us off with this?
Yeah, we've got a very good example of how with our 40 home Timber Sky starter home development, our first hurdle, if you will, is land. How do you get land? Especially in Flagstaff, we're landlocked because of our national forest. And so it's very expensive. It's usually about 50% of the cost to build an entire home. So we're always trying to find inventive ways to be able to get land for free. And that's a big stretch. So what we did with this particular development, when the developer was approaching the city, is we kind of cut him off before he got to the city. We knew he was going to ask for some zoning changes. We knew the city was going to then ask them or mandate them to give 10% of their housing stock to affordable housing. What developers really weren't thinking through, though, is that's not a demand that they build the housing. It's just a demand that they include the units. So we went to them and said, hey, how about you donate us the land and you put all of the financial onus for the infrastructure and for the houses on Habitat, allow us to manage the homes and provide workforce housing within your master plan community. And so what was really terrific about that turned into a 3-acre, $2.75 million donation to our affiliate, and then allowed us to start that process. And so it's not always a public-private partnership. It's not always a public nonprofit partnership. It really should be threefold. Let's show the private industry that not only can we support their needs, but we're saving them and helping them earn millions more dollars. That's not a bad thing. That means that developer is going to go to another part of the community and keep developing. So we're really excited that we were able to create that relationship. And then that's subsequently turned into already another 3-acre donation on the next development that they're working on for the next 40 homes. So if we just open up our minds and allow ourselves to think that we can do a 3-pronged approach, to making sure that everybody wins within that calculation.
Great example. Thank you. Gabriel, creative strategies.
All right, so this is probably one of my favorite topics around housing, but really specifically around land use and really maximizing land use. We've seen amazing examples throughout the state. One of our Vitalyst publications is kind of cataloging some of those great projects that utilize land, maximize use, have the greatest community impact. And that's through just, again, that creative land use policy. So we've been fortunate enough to work with school districts, nonprofit partners, faith-based groups, government entities that really are evaluating the best use of their land to make that biggest impact. We've seen successful projects that have been funded by low-income housing tax credits. We've seen some projects that are specifically teacher housing throughout the state that have created that teacher housing, and on the same property owned by the school district, a daycare center. So again, maximizing the impact of that one piece of property that can be utilized for multiple aspects that meet multiple community needs. So land use is just one of those. I mean, we can go through some successful legislation that passed through some controversial aspects like missing middle housing, again, infill properties to kind of bring a little bit of density that brings affordability ranges for either starter homes or entry level rates for housing, rentals for commercial mixed use property. So really, again, maximizing what we have available to us to utilize the infrastructure that's there, and allowing cities to kind of adapt some of those local properties. But that also comes with creative uses for financing. And we've seen the strains from the federal agencies that are changing the way they're funding various housing projects in different departments. So we got to get creative. And I give a shout out to our partners in the back over here, City of Phoenix, that have created a housing trust fund for the city. The city of Tempe has done something very similar. We're looking at various types of funding that will help make this happen. So if the incentive is there to help build it, there's a role that the cities play, there's a role that the states play, and we just got to get creative to figure out how we can stack this. I mean, we've been having conversations on how to maximize the impacts of opportunity zones. What's the other one? There's another tax credit that's available for development of healthcare centers and things of that nature that you can utilize and stack those to create great creative impactful developments. Some of our successful projects that are in the works are on the light rail and are partnering with the Community Development Corporation that provides services to the community, that has partnered with a federally qualified health clinic, and both of them are going to get together and build affordable housing above those services. So there are a lot of solutions that are out there right now. It just takes a lot of participation and a lot of coordination, but it's definitely possible.
Thank you for highlighting some of those. Joan, creative strategies.
Well, go figure that the two philanthropic foundations have almost identical notes. Thanks, Gabe. No, I exactly that. I wrote
No,
down.
you're good. Thank you. You need help with the hot dog? Yeah, could you get it from me?
Creative hot dogs. What?
Thank you for that. Yeah, the fun times when you have a hybrid event, right?
Yes.
So thanks, Joan. Don't let that derail you.
I'm just thinking about the $1.50 hot dog at Costco now. Okay, sorry. So creative financing. I'm gonna double down on what Gabe mentioned. Opportunity zones. How can we look at? I also think we need to look at businesses, right? We often talk about teacher housing and church housing, but we also need to make sure that the businesses are brought to the table.
I'm having a hard time. Just
Kept at the table. So employers need to be at the table. I really want to lift up Howard Epstein. Has really galvanized the real estate community around his housing for All fund. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's actually managed at the Arizona Community Foundation, but don't tell him that. But it's again an opportunity for the businesses to engage. Unfortunately, it's at a volunteer level. Again, how do we, if we can't incentivize them with a carrot, how can we lift up some policy solutions with a stick for our employers, so that every new press release that highlights, quantum computing coming to Arizona, where are the employees going to be housed? Where's the workforce? Where's the teachers going to be housed as we look at all these new innovations and opportunities coming to Arizona? So with that, with that +1 that I share with Gabe, I'll pass it back to Brad.
Yeah, Brad, tell us about the creative things you have going on in Northern Arizona.
So one of the creative solutions, we're working with a community partner, and we're in the process of working it. So I can't say who they are and exactly what it is, but it is a public-private partnership. And we're working on a housing solution that they've been researching for a long time. We've been researching it with them for a long time, where half of the project will be housing for their constituents and half of the housing will be for the community at large. Because when we come into it, just as Joan was saying, we value our teachers and we value our civic workers and the police and the fire, but we also value all the service workers, the manager at Walmart, the person working in a restaurant. They're just as important to our community as the teachers and the firemen are. And so we wanted to be able to provide housing for that segment as well. And so I think public-private partnerships is a solution. But if you're saying a creative solution, I think the creative solution is the civic side of it. And it's the voter in the room. And it's the voter saying to your elected officials, we got to solve this problem. We need to get the government and the rules that's making it hard for all these groups over here that are working around some of these issues. Like, if we could open it up and make it easier, then I think more solutions would come to the table. And I would point to the city of Austin. They started back in 2015 as a city, and they passed a lot of legislation to make it easier to build. They got grants, so they had the public, the private, they had the money and the philanthropic, and they all kind of came together. And since 2021, they've added like 120,000 units. They've lowered rent. They've lowered the entry level of the price of a home. And that's a city taking a tack at it. And then another one you can go research is the state of Montana. Similar situation, but they did it at a statewide level. And so, again, the legislature said, we got to get out of the way and we got to make it easier, because Montana was facing, and so was Austin, a huge in-migration. Not necessarily foreign workers moving in, but people moving from state to state. And Montana was an attractive state. Austin's an attractive city. And so they were getting a population boom. Arizona's experiencing that as well. We are up north. And so I think the creative solution is the voter in the room, letting your elected officials, we need to make this, we need this for the health of our community, and you need to help us make it easier for these solutions that we're talking about to exist in our communities.
Well, if I were grading the panel, Brad, you get an A+ for mentioning civics in that answer, and also give you some tangible examples. You also touched upon some of the impediments. If we have creative strategies at play and we have committed partners at play, then why is this so complicated? And why in some areas do we see such little progress? So what are the community resistance factors, or whatever sort of resistance factors, impediments that you see really need to be overcome if we're going to move the needle substantially on this issue?
So from my personal experience, I do believe there's activism has a role in our world. There's been great things that have come from it. But I think on this topic and other topics, but this one in particular, it's gotten to a point where it's becoming detrimental to the solution, because they're just a no on everything. And so some of the impediments that come from that are the process takes longer. It's a lot more expensive. You hear about projects in California, and I'll pick on you guys a little bit, but it takes 10, 15 years to get permits for a major project. It's like, how can you plan around horizons that when you're trying to help people today that you see that need this, and it's going to take us 15 years before we can put a shovel in the ground? So that's an impediment. Prescott Valley went through an era where we were growing. We were doing really well, and the public side of the equation was very efficient. If you went in with a set of plans, they're like, in 30 days, we'll have an answer. And if we have to outsource it, we will. And they had SOPs, and they were really regimented about it, and growth occurred. And we were one of the faster growing communities. Over the last 4 years, that went away. And you would walk in and you would say, when can I get my permit? Like, we don't know. Well, what's the timeline? There are no timelines. We're busy. And so you see that, but I think that's a reaction to the market and the environment around them. It's a way to slow things down. And now there's a new director in there that's putting SOPs back in. So I'm hoping it'll turn back around. But those are the impediments I see, is the more we put steps in front of a project, whether it's habitat or whether it's a private builder, those add costs. to the process. And the more costs we add on, the harder it is to keep the affordability and the attainability that we're all after. And so it's not like blaming like the government. It's like everything along the way. It's the supply chain, it's materials, it's workers. It is also the rules and the regulations and the bureaucracy that we need to go through to make sure projects are safe and they are what they need to be. But those all add cost too. So there's got to be a balance in that. And I think maybe the scales have tipped a little bit too much, that it's kind of getting in the way of affordability and attainability.
Thanks for that breakdown. I appreciate the honest reflection about your experiences in Northern Arizona, and also injecting into the conversation that homes aren't built for free. Land has to be paid for, materials have to be paid for, labor has to be paid for. And so sometimes I think the rhetoric is around how can we do this so with so much level of affordability, and yet there are real costs that are required to actually build something. So Joan, do you want to put a little bit of a philanthropic lens on the idea of what are the impeding factors, and someone that's been involved in housing for many years?
I'm going to leave the philanthropic. No,
Are you done?
All right. Okay. Well, my response to this is actually one of the second ideas that I wanted to dispel. And that is that local jurisdictions and developers are at odds. I think you're exactly right, Brad. I think that there is opportunity. There's some healthy tensions. Don't get me wrong, right? That's to be expected in any business relationship. But both local jurisdictions and especially affordable housing, well, housing developers in general, they want to make housing a reality. But it requires three necessary ingredients: political will, ongoing sustained financial investments, and then community support. And I think it's that third ingredient that's been missing. It is the not in my backyard. It is the build anywhere but here. It's the not recognizing that there needs to be diverse housing options across the state to allow for a healthy community to exist. I don't know if I'd have I think that's where I'll end the comments there. Again, you need three ingredients: political will. And I do think we have most recently, we have at the state level, somewhat at the legislative level, and definitely at the local level, you're seeing a lot more local elected officials recognizing the need for housing. I remember back in the day when I was at the, 10, 15 years ago, meeting with elected officials, and housing wasn't really on their radar. Or if it was, there was, higher priorities. Now it is very much, we all feel the impact of the housing costs. So I think we have the political leadership. I think the community support needs to be, and I don't have the answer. It's not a silver bullet, but we definitely need to make the case for all of our circles of influence. Think about, like, my son quit soccer, but when he was a soccer player, the influence that I had on the soccer lines, that's what think about your circles of influence and tell them about why we need diverse housing in your neighborhood. I think that's an important first step to build that community support.
Thanks, Joan. Eric, impediments that you may have encountered along the way or think are really hampering efforts on a broad scale?
Yeah, so, we decided, as I mentioned earlier, that we wanted to look at ourselves internally and do better. And in that process, we decided that we wanted to be an innovator in housing. And being an innovator in anything means you're going to be a disruptor within that whole area of field. That causes some people to have fear factors, animosities, concerns, and it makes it difficult for them to jump on board. And so the good news is, now that we've had this program in place for multiple years, people are starting to actually see the true results. And thankfully, they are as we predicted. And so people are slowly coming around. But I would say that one of the more difficult challenges for us is just allowing the general public to think openly and broadly and allow new ideas and new dynamic thoughts to be incorporated within established programs. It doesn't mean that we have to tear down programs. It just means that we have to really think about it consciously and then evolve those programs to meet our needs now. And that's something else that we really need to discuss, is that our societal needs today are vastly different than what they were 5 years ago before COVID, maybe 15 years ago before the Great Recession. We have gone through a lot in our time recently. And so our needs have changed. And I think our programs need to address that as well by changing also.
Thanks, Eric. Gabriel, from your perspective.
So I can give this from a perspective, from a few different perspectives. One from the philanthropic perspective that Joan kind of touched on is some of that broader aspect of input. But another perspective that I'll bring to the table is my participation at the local level, whether it be commissions, committees, things of that nature, to hear feedback from the public as we see that. I've seen various applications for various communities come through. I can't say I've ever seen anybody come in and oppose single family detached 4 to an acre type housing. Nobody comes out for that. Nobody comes out in opposition for that. What we do see is anything that has any type of density, and I do think a lot of it has to do with any misconceptions of what density does to any neighborhood, and where it's appropriately placed. There's different aspects of zoning in the built environment that should allow for various types of housing. And this is coming hot off the heels from legislation that passed yesterday. Again, I'll bring up the missing middle housing, and we've seen several cities adopt it citywide to allow that type of housing that brings a variety types of affordability ranges to different neighborhoods in great ways. And now there's opposition to that, not only at the legislature, but we're seeing that at the local city levels as well, where individuals are coming out, and everybody has the right to that opinion, and it's difficult to go back and forth, where you want to respect the community's opinion and viewpoints for what's going on in their community, but we also need to meet the need for today as well. So we've seen that back and forth pool. So that it requires a lot of communication. I mean, and that opposition is tenfold for meeting the needs of lower income individuals, for those low income housing tax credit projects that have higher densities that provide the services. I mean, that opposition is tenfold for that. That NIMBYism just is exponential for that, and the complications for building those projects through financing. They call it a capital stack, because there's 10 different variations of funding that are required for one project. So it gets even more complicated the more needs you're trying to fill, and the opposition grows. So we've seen that kind of on that scale, and we witness it at local community levels and committee levels and at the city. So it's going to take a lot of information, a lot of education, and a lot of patience with individuals. And we'll see what the legislature does.
Starts with this.
It starts with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the plug there, Joan. Appreciate it. Gabriel, your comments resonate with me, having sat on my own community's planning and zoning board. Yeah, nobody objected to the single family home with the white picket fence, but as soon as apartments were mentioned, boy, that draws a crowd. If you could, I'll ask the panel to touch upon the variety of housing. I think when people mention house or housing, we all have something that pops in our mind, right? What does that mean? And oftentimes it is that single family home, picket fence, room for a garden, room for a dog. And yet, what is the spectrum of housing that is needed across our community? And some of you have already mentioned this, right? The starter homes, workforce housing, affordable housing, all the way to seniors who might be wanting to downsize. So does anyone want to talk about the entire spectrum? And then I'll invite the folks in the room. We do have question cards. If you want to ask something, we'll collect those as we go around. And for those online, if you want to put that in the chat, we can collect that as well. So welcome your questions. Spectrum of housing all across the board. What do you see that's not talked about, and other than that, single family home, white picket fence?
Well, I would just say all of it's needed. I think the studies and the reports that have done by like Elliott Pollock and Company, they've done a lot of economic studies. Housing at every price point, there's a shortage. We've had people move to our community that are brought in to run the hospital, and they're like, oh, I'm going to move in and get a house. And then, 6 months later, like, where'd you find a house? Oh, I'm still looking. There's not any on the market. And so it's every price point. There's an issue. We have a fundamental structural housing shortage, and it impacts the affordable, attainable workforce individuals more so than the others. But you have to have housing supply at every level for the system to work, because somebody who bought this home as a starter home and moves out and moves up, well, that home becomes available for somebody else who's going to start it. They're going to buy it. Maybe it needs to be fixed up. Maybe it needs to be refurbished. We talked about habitat and refurbishing homes. Those all create opportunities. And so when you bring more supply in, people in the community move around, which creates other opportunity at the various price points. So I would be an advocate for, we need it at all levels, but it's more impactful for the attainable, affordable. That lack of supply, it really impacts that group more than it impacts the other groups.
Thank you for that. The idea that we move around in a community is really true. So I happened to be with a group of superintendents about 6 months ago talking about enrollment, and everybody talks about the demographic cliff. And this particular superintendent said, our issue isn't what the newspapers say. It's not necessarily all the other factors. It's housing, because families are staying in their home and kids are moving out and not finding somewhere to be, and seniors not willing to put their house in the market because where are they going to go? So this idea that we are locked in because of lack of choices is a real factor. So thanks for bringing that up. Any other thoughts about, again, the array of housing that is needed?
I'm going to go first.
All right. Fine.
I'm jumping in. You threw me. Yeah. Okay. So raise your hand if you ever lived in a dorm with other roommates, right? I mean, let's start thinking about what happened when we were first fresh out of college. You doubled up. I'm calling, Shanna put her head down, but Shanna Ellis at the ASU's Action Nexus, their work around shared housing. We need to think creatively, right? Like, we can do shared housing. We can think about tiny homes. We can think about modular and manufactured housing. And I know gone are the, there's misconceptions about manufactured housing and modular housing. I would say I'm hopeful that there's legislation at the federal level to allow and unlock some of the financing and make it easier to embrace modular and manufactured housing as a housing typology that we could and should lean into. And then, yeah, I mean, let's break the mold of what housing and the size of it. It no longer needs to be that McMansion that we live in. Yes, during COVID, we probably needed that McMansion because it was our playground and our work. It was our office. It was our home. It was all these different things. But let's think about things in a different way.
You should have let me go first. No, really, I think my perspective is a little bit. I don't want to say that it's not being discussed because Joan had mentioned it. It's the first time. Well, it's been happening for several years, but legislators, elected officials, municipal leaders are discussing it now. This is the main topic of discussion across the state because it's impacting so many people across the entire spectrum of housing. So I can't even say that it's not being discussed anymore because it is such a prevalent issue now. Really, it's figuring out how, and a complete shameless plug, the work that the Arizona Housing Coalition is doing to create a bipartisan housing caucus where we have legislators that taking up leadership, two from each side of the aisle, to have these conversations, again, because it's such a critical conversation now. And, we need, again, we as advocates need to educate those legislators on the impacts and the need for low-income housing tax credit and housing trust fund funding, as well as what we've seen with legislation for missing middle, adaptive reuse, things that entry-level homes, things of that nature. So I do feel it is being discussed. I do think we can do a better job in educating how we can progress some of those initiatives forward.
Eric, did you want to add up to that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. When we're talking about the entire housing continuum, it's important to know that the continuum is a step-by-step process, right? We're trying to move families that may find themselves in homelessness, get them into possible transitional housing, maybe rental assistance after that, then possibly into a habitat starter home after that, and then graduating into self-sufficiency. So when we're talking about the step-by-step process, the one thing that's missing is how are we enabling the end user to go step by step? And I really strongly feel that in order for us to do that, we have to create shared equity savings platforms on all levels. And so if you're in that transitional housing unit, or if you're in subsidized rental, if it's a nonprofit or if it's a governmental agency, how can they create the internal processes to make some of that rental go into a forced savings account for those folks to cash out to move to the next level? And so I know for us, what we're now creating is a starter home 2.0 model, which is for the missing middle population. And it would be a rental, not a home ownership model, but it would be a shared equity savings platform. And so if rent is $1,000, then $500 is going to go right into their savings for whenever they decide to end their lease agreement with Habitat. And that gives them the money, the empowerment to be able to move to the next level. And then I'll use a perfect example with our Timber Sky Master Plan community. What I love about it is that we are a commingled community. So we have a 220 bed LIHTC development that is directly adjacent to our 40 starter homes. My goal is for those families to walk their dogs with the dream and the aspiration of the $1,000 down payment that's needed to buy a starter home. But at the same time, my homeowners in those starter homes are walking in their participating HOA community with $1 million homes as their neighbors, dreaming of cashing out that starter home equity and utilizing that. And it's really an important concept, again, with the housing continuum, is how do we encourage people to want to better themselves? And it's not always lumping people in the same tragic situations. It's about giving them an example to be able to want to do better. It's keeping up with the Joneses. It's just that simple. So how do we empower folks to want to be better? But most importantly, how do we provide a product, which is wealth, to allow them to do that?
Thanks for that. Questions coming in fast and furious. So I'm going to start clumping a couple of them together. So new is part of the answer. New development, new housing, new build, part of the answer. But what about rehab? What about infill? And what is the impact on short-term rentals with our housing crisis or housing issues? Anyone want to start that one? Joan looks ready to jump on it.
Well, I lift up this Housing Arizona report, and I'm not going to find it fast enough, but some stats on, in 2025, 32% of all residential home purchases below $300,000 were made by investors, right? Our starter home inventory is gobbled up by investors. Now, there's a narrative, right? Like that's what this report says. Another think tank in our state says Airbnbs aren't the problem. So which is it? And then we should have all the think tanks come together town hall style, like Arizona town hall style, and like have those conversations, right? So I don't know the answer about Airbnbs, but I mean, obviously we do know the stats that real data that says that there's an impact. Anybody else?
I think that captured it pretty well, unless someone else has. Brad, do you want to talk a little bit about the rehab infill or?
Well, yeah, I would just say, I mean, I like those stats, and you kind of got to go back to the why. So because housing's gotten expensive, people are forced into rental. So people want to get in the rental market, and honestly, there's a lot of them are retirees. They've built their nest egg, and they're like, I don't like the stock market anymore. But if I bought a couple homes, I could be a landlord, and that's good cash flow for me. And then I have an asset, and I'm increasing my wealth that's being talked about that I'm going to give to my kids. And so you see that, and then that leads to your rehab question, because nobody's moving. And you said it earlier, I could sell my house and I can make a lot of money today, but I want to stay in my community. What am I going to buy? I can't buy anything. There's no longer that migration pattern that exists. And so the rehab market goes away because nobody's moving and they're just doing home improvements. And so I think you got to get back. It's in the economics, and our housing shortage has created an economic opportunity for some, the big investors that are buying lots of homes and just renting them. And retirees who, we talk about the greatest wealth transfer that's coming. There's a lot of money in our retirees, and they're investing in real assets as well. And it's exasperating the problem. And I think the long-term solution, and it is long-term, is you have to add supply to the equation, and then it starts to balance it out.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is I know that mentioned infill. Infill is going to play a significant role in this, and adaptive reuse, either of single family detached to maximize maybe a little more density. And when we talk about those duplexes and triplexes, and that's a big part of the conversation that we're having right now, not only at the legislature but at the local levels, how to maximize some of those infill lots. The other thing is preservation of affordability. When we talk about that, there's things like community land trusts that help keep that preservation, and then with our low income housing tax credit at that end time of affordability, we've seen trend has been a lot of those go out to market, so we're losing significant number of stocks in affordable units. So finding a way to keep those preserved for longevity for our nonprofit partners that keep those units affordable is something that we need to do a little better job at as well.
Thank you for that. So we've had a couple of examples here about the long term, adding to the housing supply, and Gabriel, your comments. We have a couple of questions related to the most urgent immediacy, which is evictions. And so what sort of policies do we need to look at to address that crisis? How is that impacting the overall housing situation as those rates continue to increase?
I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation. So we need eviction courts. We need to I had the opportunity, to bring some of my colleagues from the Housing Coalition to sit in on an eviction hearing process. And in 90 minutes, about over 90, maybe a little less, filings, petitions were heard. And the majority, there was maybe 5 tenants that showed up. Majority of the tenants that showed up didn't pay rent because they were mad at the landlord for fixes that didn't happen. So we need to broker the relationship between landlords and tenants. We need to mediate and broker those conversations. And then one young woman showed up and didn't know where to go. She had already received the 5-day notice, had this piece of paper, showed up, and it was too late. Thankfully, that was one judge that managed all of those court hearings, those eviction proceedings. But we need one judge at each courthouse to handle the flow, especially in Maricopa County. So there's some standardization. And I think that judge, hopefully will be well informed of all the resources available in the community. But I think that one step is an important first step.
Along those similar lines, Vitalyst gets to partner with a variety of community agencies and advocates. One of them provides training not for legal purposes, but they provide training for our nonprofit organizations that interface with individuals facing eviction. So we're talking about prevention at this point. So they walk with that individual that might be facing eviction to help them walk through exactly what Joan was talking about, not understanding the court proceedings, the process of eviction, things of that nature. So some of our partners are training the nonprofit organizations that interact with those individuals, that come to them with that urgency that they're about to be evicted or that notice that they've received for the first time, and help walk them through that. So they're actually being certified now to help be that advocate for that individual at the, I guess the end, I don't want to say entry point, but really at that point of eviction, to understand how that process goes and what role they play in it before they show up to a court when it's too late. So that's been a great success that we've seen individual and community organizations kind of rally behind.
Excellent. Great examples. Thank you for that. And believe it or not, we are running close to the end of our time on the panel. So I want to thank everyone for bringing your expertise, your thoughtfulness to the discussion. And as we close out, what would be your golden nugget of advice? They all went oof under their breath. What's the golden nugget? And I'm not even going to say who you're going to give your advice to, but the golden nugget that you just wish someone would run with, believe in, take away regarding this issue.
I'll break the ice. Be courageous. Don't think your idea is a bad idea. Share your idea with your friends, with your families, with your neighbors. Expand on that idea, expand on the thought. You know, it was said, and it's true, there's not a one size fits all fix. And so any of us can come up with innovative ideas to make life a little bit better for all of us and our neighbors and our friends and our community. So be courageous and know that you've got great ideas. We just have to share them broadly.
Thank you, Eric.
Mine's going to be very similar to Eric's, and I think this stems from one of my favorite sayings is I live in the gray. There's nuances to absolutely everything. So be creative. Turn over every rock, look at every national best practice, review the report, look at great examples, see how they could apply here, approach people that you might not think would be open to that conversation about how we could create something here. Just have that conversation, throw it out there. I do that all the time. So I definitely, like I said, I like to live in the gray, and that allows me the ability to look at various things from different perspectives and see how we can, if it takes 4 or 5 things to stack, whether it's policy, funding, community interaction, design, whatever that may look like, just get creative.
Thank you, Gabriel.
I'm going to +1 what Gabe said, and actually highlight Nicole Newhouse. Her favorite saying is "yes and." So yes, and we need to have diverse housing, and we need to be attentive to ensuring local community feel. We need to address our unhoused population and recognize that addressing them and putting them in housing right away is more cost effective. So it's all of these policy intersections. It's a yes and conversation.
Thank you, Joan.
Well, I like what everybody said, and I would add to that, don't forget. We all know someone, if it wasn't us directly or in our family, that struggled, that made it through the tough times, lived with others, had roommates, pinched pennies, cut costs to get where we are today. And now we have ours. Don't forget. Don't make it harder for the next generation to get theirs. And I think sometimes people forget. So I would say, don't forget.
That was a good one. Thank you, Brad. What do we say to our fabulous panel? Thank you so much. A lot of wisdom, a lot of creative thinking was shared. So I hope that you will take advantage of the community conversations, hosting them, bringing them to your spaces so that this conversation can continue. I'm going to turn it back over to our MC. Thank you so much.
One more round of applause. That was a fantastic panel discussion. Thank you to Brad and Gabriel and Joan and Eric for sharing so much, what I like to always say are pearls of wisdom.